Live from the Deer and Deer Hunting headquarters, welcome to Wednesday and welcome to Deer Talk Now. Thanks once again for joining us. I'm Dan Schmidt along with Brian Lovett today. Brian, we're going to, it's almost Valentine's Day. It's February. It's really rotten weather here in Wisconsin in the upper Midwest. And we're really sick of the cold and ice. And we're going to talk a little bit about turkey hunting today on Deer Talk Now.
That's right. It's, kind of looking forward in a positive way, I guess. Barring, I'm assuming we're not going to get a huge basket of Valentine's candy tomorrow. But, if that doesn't happen, I guess we'll, think about turkey hunting, think about warm April and May days, and, dream of better times ahead.
I'm dreaming of 40-degree weather, actually, and never going to not stop thinking about deer. I'm thinking about shed hunting. I really want to get out there, but there's a couple things going on right now. It's, we're 10, 13 days into February, not quite 2 weeks, and the thing about it is that you need to understand is a lot of people think, ooh, this cold weather, it's causing bucks to shed their antlers early. Not really, unless the things we know throughout research is that unless it's a really catastrophic event, like really deep-seated cold weather or just stress from a buck that's been rutted down a lot, those bucks, once they hit 3 years old, from the time they're 3.5 to the time they're 6.5 or when they die, they're going to shed within about a day or 2 or 3 of each other every single year.
Yeah, that's really fascinating to me. You talk to a lot of folks who do intensive management on their properties, Lakoskis, folks like that, and they're talking about deer, that they've documented on their places that are probably shedding both antlers, maybe even on the same day every year. It's just fascinating that their internal calendars work in that way, and we always, I guess it's one of those conventional wisdom things, you get a big cold snap in early December or something like that, and you think, oh, those bucks are going to be dropping their horns right away, but that's really simply isn't the case, especially with those older deer.
Simply not the case, especially if they're not stressed. I mean, they need good nutrition, obviously, and if they have food throughout the winter and the snowpack is not real deep. And the other thing that we found out is, now I know there's guys who've been out there, they're going to email me now and say, hey, I already found some sheds. That does happen. Mm-hmm. And there's different reasons, mostly genetic. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's going to be, weather caused or stress caused on the deer herd. But the other thing that we've learned is that it's usually this time of the year when they're starting to shed. So you're looking at early February, on into the end of February, and then some deer are going to take until March, some deer are going to take until April, and then you even have a weird, bizarre case of you see a deer shedding an antler in April.
Yeah.
I mean, or in May, I should say.
Yeah.
So it's pretty weird that way.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating. I mean, now that the daylight is increasing, we can, on our drive home, actually, you view these big winter herds of whitetails out in the fields, feeding if it's a decent night, and to see how many antlered bucks you can see, to try to spot, a buck that's maybe dropped his horns, which of course is very difficult when you're driving, but just kind of really cool to see the different dynamic going on out there right now.
Exactly. The other thing that we like to talk about is that with shed hunting, now would be, you can start thinking about it, but you really want to kind of hold yourself back, especially if you're seeing a lot of bucks with antlers, because if you get in there, you bust them out of their bedding areas, that can have an enormous amount of stress, especially in winter areas where you have a lot of snow and ice. Mm-hmm. But we're not going to talk about shed hunting today, even though we touched on it. We're going to talk about coyote hunting, and who better to talk with us than Jerry Peterson from Woods Wise Products. We've both known Jerry for a very long time. Mm-hmm. He's one of the pioneers in this industry. He's invented calls. He's brought us to understand vocalizations not only of deer, but turkeys and other animals, and especially game animals that we hunt. But, we've talked about the hot screaming fawn mama call a lot on Deer Talk Now over the past few months. We're going to talk to Jerry on how he uses it at this time of the year, February, March, April, leading up into turkey season, on how to use that call to lure in some coyotes and extend your winter season. A lot of people are sitting around bored right now. There's not a lot you can do. You can go out there and hunt coyotes right now. You grab a .223 or your favorite rifle and get out there, and if it's cold weather, if it's snow, you can still hunt coyotes. So let's get Jerry on the line, and then as a bonus, we're also going to talk to Jerry and Brian. We're going to have Jerry and Brian together, which is a treat to have two really seasoned veteran turkey hunters give us some more turkey hunting tips on Deer Talk today. But let's talk to Jerry and let's get some predator hunting insights on how to get some of these coyotes off the land to better manage your deer herd. Let's see what Jerry is up to today. I think we're catching him at home, so we're going to have to...
Thank you. 2V5.
Okay,
Thank you. 2.
that didn't work. Try it
Well, Jerry might just be getting in from coyote hunting, but
There we go. That's kind of loud. I'm going to...
Hello?
Hi, Jerry.
Yes.
Jerry, hi, Dan Schmidt and Brian Lovett on Deer Talk Now. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey guys, how's everything going?
Very good. It's been pretty cold and snowy and icy up here our way. I don't think you quite have that down in Tennessee.
No, this morning I looked out the back in the backyard, and the gobblers were all strutting. About 8 of them circled around a little band of hens and gobbling their heads off. We've been back and forth between winter and spring, so they can't decide what what time of year it is.
just let them hold that mood for a few more weeks, right, Jerry?
I hope so. I hate to see it peak early because we miss a lot of the turkey action when it does.
Yeah.
Now, turkeys are different than other animals. I mean, than deer. I mean, you get that warm stretch, and you could actually, those things could be going into breeding cycles right now, couldn't they?
Oh yeah. Over the years, I've actually filmed gobblers breeding hens as early as late February in our area when we get a little spell like this. However, the actual egg laying process will depend on the ground temperature. Until that ground temperature stabilizes in the 54-degree range, those hens will not start actually laying that nest.
That's pretty cool. Well, we wanted to hold off on the turkey talk a little bit. That's why I got Brian with us today, Jerry. But, you know, we were talking about deer management and things that, you know, property owners can do right now, especially in the off season. We hit February. In most states, coyote hunting is open year-round. I know it is here. And we've been talking about, you know, how to call in coyotes and maybe take a couple off. And I know taking 1 or 2 coyotes isn't going to have a major impact on a deer herd in a region, but specifically on small properties, this does help. And I know you do this a lot, and we wanted to pick your brain a little bit on some of the tactics you use right now on how you approach that.
Sure, exactly. You know, to drive home the point you were talking about, you can have an impact in you know, on small areas, especially this time of year, because this is the breeding period between January and February, and this is a time when coyotes, pairs in particular, male and female, become very localized, and they begin to defend a specific territory so that later they can have their pups in that territory. So it does begin to play into our strategy on how we approach calling coyotes. For example, this time of year, before I even attempt to use a prey type call, in other words, a rabbit or something like that, I will open every setup with 1 or more forms of howling because of that territorial effect. Very often, coyotes in the area will respond directly. Now, what I mean by howling, there's 2 types of howls that you can focus on this time of year. One is the domain howl of the male, and the other is the invitation howl of the female. Simple way to remember what the domain howl sounds like is picture those old black and white Wild West movies where the coyote's howling at the moon. In other words, it's yip, 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 ow, long, drawn-out, deep male voice. On a howler, it would sound something like this. And then so what I'm doing when I'm doing that is I'm challenging that male territorial dog for his territory. A lot of times I may not even get into any prey calling, prey in distress. Another little tactic is to appeal on the female's territory response and also to the male's desire to meet all the females in the area, and that's to use a female howl, which is short, no barks before it, and higher pitched than the male. So it's just, ow, ow. Let me try that on a howler. It'll be probably better than my voice this morning. And you get the idea from there. So you kind of got the picture, guys, on that?
Absolutely. So what you do is you start your setup with some of these howls,
Yep.
and where do you progress from there?
Well, sit tight for about a couple of 3 minutes. Don't make any more calls. Have your weapon up ready. If you're hunting with a rifle, have it up on your shooting sticks. If you're hunting with a shotgun, have it propped up on your knees so you can keep your movement to a minimum. This time, one of my biologist buddies that I used to work with a lot on coyote management used to put it this way. He said, I may not know what a coyote wants to eat today, but I know that a coyote's always curious on who's in his territory. And that's what we're dealing with here, especially during this breeding period. So the next thing I would do is if I see a coyote coming and he hangs up, all I'm going to do is do a couple of barks on a howler just to aggravate him. In other words, when a coyote barks, he's upset and he's challenging and he's telling people to back off. That's why you don't use a bark with the female invitation howl, for example. We don't want to send a mixed message of back off, stay away from me, and then come here in the case of that female invitation howl. So in order to just rile them up, they're coming, and now they're sitting down probably to get a little more information about, well, where are these coyotes that I'm hearing in my territory. So you get on a howler and just bark a bit. And that is my only coaxing call when I'm already using that direct howling type response thing. Now, if I don't see a coyote or don't have any indication that a coyote is responding directly to my howls, now I've primed the area for coyotes in the area to understand and believe there are other coyotes within, in the area. And now when I use my distress callers, it paints a more believable scenario. If there's two of you hunting, one guy can kind of blow that distress caller, and we'll talk about how to blow distress callers in a minute, and the other one can blend in a little bit of barking just to keep that picture going that there's other coyotes, and in fact they've caught something, and now they're also kind of fighting over what they've caught to see who gets to claim it. Every time you're using any kind of calling technique, you're always trying to paint a picture with the sound, because you may or may not be using decoys with the setup, and we can talk about decoying also in a second. But so that's what I'm doing, is I'm trying to add to that scenario of by howling, and now I've got two coyotes that are hunting something, they've caught something, and now they're fighting amongst each other over what they've caught.
Now, describe to me your progression, Jerry. I mean, you say you go through that at one setup. If it would not work out, do you then move to a new setup a few hundred yards away and repeat that process, or what's your thought for say an entire day of coyote hunting?
Yeah, yes, and here's something very important to remember before we talk about moving and that kind of thing. Number one, if you get caught moving into your setup, game over. Coyotes figured out that anything that they're going to hear from that area is going to be made by humans and not by something, and all you're doing is just broadening their education. Number two, coyotes are extremely smart. They're probably one of the smartest wild creatures we have in North America. They have the ability not only to decipher information, and it's like your own dog in your house. He's got the ability to relate previous experiences, both good and bad, so that they know how to respond later to that same scenario when it comes up. So the reason I'm giving you that background is it will affect the calling techniques that you use, not only from one calling setup to another, but also from day to day as you come and go using the same areas. The key that I'm trying to get to with this is you don't want to keep repeating the same technique over and over again, because you never know when you've been busted and you didn't see the coyote that came in somewhat from behind you, figured out that you were a hunter making those calls, and now he's educated. So as I pick up, I'll give a spot about 10 minutes after I've done the distress calling, and I'll sit and wait and watch. Try to remain absolutely motionless, because the coyotes coming in are going to be focused dead on that spot. You would be amazed that a coyote can come from over a half a mile and know within probably 10 feet of where that sound is coming from. So you've got to remain absolutely still and turn your head very slowly, and mostly look with your eyes and listen very carefully with your hearing. See if you can't detect the sounds of movement or the movement itself. Now, after I've given it the roughly 10-minute sit, I like to withdraw and try to get into another area without being, by using the terrain features, whether it's a creek or whether it's working around a hillside. But in the winter time, when the foliage is down and the humidity is very dry, your sounds will carry very well, even upwind for perhaps a half a mile. So, and by the way, downwind, when it's really blowing hard, that's going to carry your sound maybe upwards to 3/4 of a mile in open country. So I'm going to move not the full half a mile, obviously. I'm going to move forward probably about a 1/4 mile, or roughly 500 yards or something like that. Set up again. Set up, by the way, always with the wind in your face if at all possible. Because a coyote, especially a pair of coyotes, because remember, this is the breeding season, you may have one coyote come straight to you while another one is circling, using the terrain features to circle around and try to get downwind. Eventually, both coyotes will try to get downwind if they don't see a decoy or something that catches their attention. Here's a little tip on what to watch for, by the way. Very often, the circling coyote will bounce up on his hind legs and take a peek up over a terrain feature, or if he's moving through tall grass, you'll see him just kind of pop up, kind of what I would call periscoping, where they just jump up, take a quick look, and then drop down and continue their circling. So anyway, getting back to the movement thing, when I set up the second time, at one setup I may have used a male domain howl. So the second setup I may use one or more female invitation howls. I try not to use them both in the first setup, so that I have the option to use the other at the second setup. And then I would use a different prey call when I get into the prey call itself, whether it's a mouse, a cottontail, a wounded rabbit, a bird in distress. There's a whole variety of things that we can get into that you might want to use. But the key is you don't want to use the sound that perhaps your next door neighbor or the other hunting buddy in your hunting club had just used the day before. And that we'll get into that a little bit more, time permitting, but you want to have as many different variations to work with as possible.
Okay, that's some really interesting stuff, Jerry. And for anybody who's starting off coyote hunting, it's important to understand this isn't just about walking out there and sitting down and start calling, because you have to think about scent control. You have to think about how you're painting that picture on, as Jerry said, to create a scenario that coyote's going to find believable. And I think that's why a lot of us actually, and I'm guilty of that, going out there thinking that, oh, there's no coyotes out here. It's just because you're not hunting them right. But Jerry, there's two questions I came across on the Deer Talk Now email send from yesterday, and the two that came out most often was, what time of day is best for coyote hunting, and what caliber do you prefer when coyote hunting in your rifle?
Well, let's address the caliber situation right off the bat. Your deer rifle is probably your least expensive and yet most accurate coyote weapon you could have at your disposal. Likewise, your turkey shotgun, loaded with a large size shot, can very well be your best close range turkey weapon. Now, if you really want to get into the nuts and bolts, basically any of the 20 caliber range calls, guns, for example, a 22 250, a 223. 223 is great in the sense that the ammunition is readily available, or normally it would be, not right now. And it's relatively inexpensive to shoot because it being a military load, it's available to the typical guy, at a fairly modest cost. Other favorites, I like to use a 243 if there's high wind present. The problem with the 22 250, the 22 Magnum, or the 223 and the 22 250 is that they are going to be moved by the wind fairly easily, especially in a crossing wind. So your windage factor on those smaller calibers is a problem. If I were to say, for the average deer hunting guy that just wants to have a great all-around gun, the 243 would be my choice, because it handles the wind much better than probably any of the 20-some caliber weapons.
Really good point there. Now, what about time of the day for hunting?
Okay, my attitude in the winter is the best time to go is when I have time to go.
Kind of like deer hunting, then, yeah. There's pros and cons to both times of day. In the mornings, in the winter, chances are the coyotes have been hunting all night. Perhaps they found a roadkill, or they've been successful at hunting up something. And so the hunger factor may not be as great, but the territorial factor is probably stronger in the morning, from my experience, than it is in the afternoon. Conversely, in the wintertime, you'll see coyotes out in the middle of the day in rough weather, out in open fields mousing, and in other words, if they hear a mouse in grass, they'll tend to rise up on their back legs and then pounce on it. So really, from about 2 o'clock on in the afternoon can be an excellent time, because now they need to replenish their energy supply. One of the advantages that we have in the wintertime is that food sources for coyotes are more limited than any other time of the year. And let me just give you this example. I once asked my biologist buddy just exactly what's in a coyote's diet, and he said it'd be easier to list the things that weren't in his diet.
than it would be to list the things that he will eat. They'll eat farm crops. They'll eat cow manure. They'll eat berries and fruits and nuts through the summer. So summer food can be plentiful, and but in the wintertime, of course, most of those food sources are not going to be available. So I tend to use more of the prey calls in the afternoon, and seem to have better luck with that. Now, some areas, and it's worth mentioning, some of the people that are tuned in may be fortunate enough to actually be able to hunt in the evenings, after dark. And if they are, the best time is the first hour right after it gets dark.
What now, in terms of the mating period, Jerry, how long is that going to last? I mean, where you're at, or how long are you going to keep up with the appealing to their territorial instincts? Does that go through March into the denning season, or what are you looking at typically?
Yeah, the typical breeding season is going to be pretty much the same anywhere you find coyotes. You kind of think about, when we talk about deer, we always talk about the fawns hitting the ground at the optimum time in the spring, so that they get the benefit of the mother's milk and the green up and the high quality of food that's available. Same thing somewhat holds true with coyote birthing times, in that when that flush of green hits the woods, also all the young of the year, rabbits, deer, you name it, start hitting the ground also, and that provides an abundance for the coyote pair to feed their young. Now, directly into what period will the territorial response be strong? Yes, it's from January into the actual birthing period, and to a degree into that birthing period, and we're talking about May. Typically, May is when most of the pups are born in most areas, and early to mid-April in some other areas. So they're gonna continue to defend their territory. The difference is that as you get into the birthing, the parents will range a wider and wider area in their efforts to find something to bring back to the den. So the territorial thing starts breaking down as they have to travel further and further from the den.
Okay, that's great. Jerry, we have about a minute left on this topic, but
okay.
Actually, why don't we switch right over, because I wanted to talk turkey with you a little bit.
Okay.
Because when we're talking turkey hunting, I don't think of anybody better we could talk turkey with. Scratch that. What I wanted to ask you is, as you get closer to turkey season and you are still coyote hunting,
sure,
how can I use that lost fawn mama call to call in a coyote? Because I have yet to do it on a coyote, and I'm itching to try it.
Okay, we wait, and that brings up a separate subject. Working with my fur bearer biologist Gary Cook, years ago we ran a video in the early '90s called Howling Bucks, and we talked about using fawn decoys and fawn distress calls to call coyotes in the early summer, and that's when I begin to use it. Is actually about a month after the fawns hit the ground. So, like in Wisconsin where you are, fawning typically begins in late May and early June. So I'm going to be looking into that latter part of June and into July. It's hot. It's it's not the time of year that people typically think about hunting coyotes, but that's when you do it. By that time they have dialed in, and I always tell people, try with coyotes to match the feature food of the time. I think it's worth mentioning right now. Their coyotes are really wreaking havoc on the turkey populations. So here's a little tip: you want to start your coyote hunting before dawn near those roosts where the turkeys are, because you can count on the fact that the coyotes in that area will be dialed in on that turkey roost. Now, in the case of the summer fawns, we want them to get a few fawn kills under their belt. Not that I want to, but in order for the fawn calling technique to work best, that's when I'm going to use a fawn in distress. About 3 to 4 weeks after the fawns hit the ground is when I begin. Your foliage is going to be higher at that time, and your humidity is going to be quite a bit higher, so your calling is not going to penetrate as deeply into the territory. So you're going to be moving your setup about 300 yards at a time as you advance into the area. The technique that I use in fawn distress is first the distress call, and on the mama, and you don't have to do this too terribly loud, but on the mama it's got 2 tones, so I'm going to exhale. And you keep a pretty good flow of that going. What's kind of fun about it is that not only will you call the coyotes, but the does. In probably a half of your setups, the does will come and run laps around you.
They come in. I mean, I've seen your videos proving this. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
And the response.
Then, as a coaxer, then I'm going to use the mama, and I think, if people have been kind of following the history of this mama call as we brought it out, a mama call is a lost fawn, and so all I want to do is, in this case, I'm going to inhale on the call, and it's going to be higher pitched and softer. And these are forms of contact or lost calls, and they're just killer as a coaxing call. So that's the technique approach that I would take. No sense in howling. Doesn't matter so much at that time. We go for the feature food, and coyotes are taking anywhere from 9 to 12 fawns a year. I'm talking about one coyote, according to some studies. So by dialing in and using the fawn call, we're also doing something really positive for our deer management, and that is that we're taking out offending coyotes that have learned the technique of hunting fawns. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, since they're fast learners, we're also habitually, we're training them that a fawn in distress may also be connected to a couple of gunshots and bad situations. We can actually, from the studies that the fur bearer biologist and I did, you may actually be able to retrain them to go focus on rabbits or go out and eat mushrooms and cow manure and the rest that they have available to them.
Rather eating that than the fawns. Well,
yes.
Let's switch over. That's great. Anybody who wants one of these lost fawn mama calls, shopdeerhunting.com. We have them on sale there. Or any Woodswise products, go to callmasters.com. They have everything you need from hunting coyotes to turkeys.
Dan, I want to mention we have an absolutely fabulous predator package that'll be available for just a few more weeks here. You get a howler. You get the Mini 3, which has their hands-free, distress calls. You got a mouser, a jackrabbit, and a rodent, and a cottontail. And then you have an open reed call. That also, for those guys that haven't started, you're getting $53 worth of product for $29.99.
And that's at callmasters.com, correct?
At woodswise.com.
Woodswise.com.
Right.
Okay, let's switch over to turkeys.
Okay.
We're short on time for this, but I wanted to ask you first, Jerry, and I'm going to ask Brian about the hunting tactics later, because that Brian he's killed so many turkeys now I've lost count. But is if just giving somebody who's a newer turkey hunter, or maybe who's they're watching Deer Talk, so we know they're diehard deer hunters, and maybe they haven't done a lot of turkey hunting. What are 2 tips that you can provide right now for somebody who's maybe going out there this spring unsure of what they're doing?
Okay. The first thing that I see from a guy that's just starting out is he lacks confidence that he's not a good caller. Actually, in most cases, that will actually play into their advantages. Brian will tell you the worst offense that most experienced professional hunters have is that they call too often and they call too loud. Remember this very simple aspect about turkey hunting. You want the gobbler to break his natural instinct of normally the way it works is he does the gobbling and the hens come to him. So what we're doing by calling to a gobbler is we're reversing the role. We want the gobbler to come hunt and look for us. And the way that you do that is to keep your calling to a minimum. If you're getting a response, and this is a key thing to remember, if you're getting a response to your hen yelping and the gobbler is right on top of your calls, he likes it. And that's a good indicator that he is going to come to you. So when you get a gobbler to start cutting you off, then slow down the frequency that you call to him. If he gets quiet, in other words, let's say he keeps gobbling after you've called and he gets quiet, Brian will bear this out. 9 times out of 10, he's on his way. So I'm going to tone my calling down even more and just do a simple little hen yelp, something like this, and nothing more. And most of the time, if he's there or if he's on his way, he'll cut you off again with a gobble. Stop calling at that point. So that's the number one thing I see people make. Number 2 is the setup. You've got to be somewhere where a turkey just naturally wants to go. If you think you can crawl into a really tight thicket with a woven wire fence between you and where that bird is and expect the bird to come in that thicket with you, it's not going to happen. So typically I tell people who maybe haven't done a lot of turkey hunting, look for areas with fairly fresh scratching sign in the leaves, and that's a good bet the turkeys want to be there.
Awesome. Those are great tips. Jerry, I'm going to let you go right now. We're going to talk a little bit more with Brian on the way back, but I sure hope you can come back and join us, because I think I could sit here all day long and talk hunting with you, and it's always a pleasure having you on.
Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate that, and it's always a pleasure to be on the show with you. And anytime you want to call, absolutely, give me a call.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry.
Take care. Good hunting, guys.
Thanks. Brian, what can I say about Jerry Peterson? He's been there, done that. I mean, and not only that, he's so unassuming. He's always willing to help out and give tips and advice.
Yeah, I love Jerry just because, like you said, he's so unassuming, and he really is just a font of knowledge on so many levels. I mean, we talk about, deer vocalizations, turkey hunting, predator calling. I mean, wild hogs, for example. I mean, Jerry was a pioneer in calling wild hogs. I mean, so he's really, his breadth of knowledge to me is always incredible, and he's just a regular guy you might go to the corner diner and sit down with and start talking about hunting, The thing is, you could listen to Jerry, like we said, for hours and hours.
Hours and hours, and I can listen to you talk about turkey hunting for the same amount of time. And one thing I want to ask and pick your brain on, Brian, is as a deer hunter and I'm going out to my property, let's say I've hunted a new property last year for deer season. What can I learn about that property now by going out and hunting it here next month after that for turkey season? What are some of the things that you do while you're turkey hunting to learn that property, not to only become a better turkey hunter, but to become a better deer hunter?
It's always fascinating to me, Dan, when you go out. The first thing that always strikes me anytime I step in the woods in spring is just how incredibly apparent all the rubs are on the trees. You know how it is looking for rubs, and going up to the season and during the season. In spring, for whatever reason, those rubs just seem to stand out like signposts out there. And I'll I'll be on properties that I might have been on all fall, and suddenly in April I'll look and it's like, well, there's a rub line right there going, down this fence line, for example, and it's just, to me, it's just another piece of information in that whole puzzle, figuring out a buck's, core area, his preferred travel routes, seeing how he's relating to food sources at that time. So that's the main thing. Also observations are going to be key. It's kind of nice because you can actually get out and kind of bomb around it and see a lot of the deer. And, during turkey season, if you would happen to bump a buck out of his core area, it's not ideal, obviously, especially with a very mature animal, but it's not the end of the world either, I mean, if nothing else, you've learned a little bit more about that mature deer's core area, and then, when turkey season's over, obviously get out of there and leave it alone, let him get comfortable again, but go through the summer armed with that little bit of knowledge again about how he's using that landscape. So, I mean, there are just so many clues out there that you can pick up while you're in the process of turkey hunting.
Now let's flip that around and say, what can I use for my deer hunting knowledge to help me get closer to a gobbler this spring?
Number one to me is going to be the lay of the land at your property. If you're bow hunting, say in 80 here in central Wisconsin, obviously any good bow hunter is going to have just an intimate knowledge of the terrain features, the timber on that land, the food sources, and that's always a big piece of the puzzle. Turkey location is going to vary. I mean, you know how it is in fall, you go out on your bow stand, and if, for example, you have a great white oak acorn crop dropping on your piece of property in fall, you're probably going to see just a ton of turkeys, those big fall family flocks. Moving into winter, you're going to see those huge, huge flocks feeding there possibly. That's not going to be the case when turkey season opens in spring. Those birds, especially as the season gets later, are going to have dispersed throughout their habitat. There are probably always going to be turkeys in that good habitat area, but certainly not in the numbers and the concentrations that you saw perhaps in fall and certainly winter. So number one to me is always just getting that intimate knowledge of the land. If there are turkeys on the place in the fall, just kind of seeing how they're using the landscape, what kind of food they're hitting, just how they're moving through the landscape, using it in their daily routines. Every bit of knowledge like that is going to help you come spring. Roost situations, perhaps, especially if you have bad weather, you can see where birds are roosting in rainy situations, wind, things like that. It's just one more little bit of information that come spring can help you out.
Exactly. And another thing that I found interesting over the years that you've taught me, don't get too excited. We're here in February, and I saw 50 gobblers out there today. I'm going to just be covered up with them by the time April gets here. Not so much the case, is it?
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be, I think when our season opens in mid-April, you're still going to have some of those vestiges of winter flocks hanging around, especially those big bachelor groups of gobblers in those prime wintering areas. I was just talking to a friend yesterday. He had seen a huge wad of year and a half to 2-year-old gobblers, birds that'll be 2-year-olds in spring, out at a corn stubble field by his place. And he asked me what I would expect, and I said, well, I expect that there will be some gobblers in that general area. I mean, they're not going to be that wad of 15 that he saw yesterday. Those birds are going to have dispersed throughout the landscape, and fill up that available habitat, especially as spring progresses. Early in the season, you're still going to see some of those groups and some of those big conglomerations of birds around, but even then, they're going to have dispersed somewhat, So it's always good to see those big big groups in winter, and know that if the habitat's good, there's going to be some turkeys there, certainly, but don't go there and expect to have the 15 gobblers roosting, in the pine tree right above your stand again. So
we wish that could happen, but that's
right.
not always the case. A couple other things to get to. What we failed to mention so far is this week's special for Deer Talk Now is a turkey digital kit, and this is pretty cool. We have this at shopdeerhunting.com. Expand your seasons. If you haven't turkey hunted, you might want to try it out. This is going to give you everything. It's basically everything Brian has learned in his past 25 years as a turkey hunter, and the things that he's learned from some of the best turkey hunters in the country. It's at shopdeerhunting.com. It's 7 digital downloads. Just go there now at the website. You can call that toll-free number on the screen there and get this. And if you mention you saw it on if you mention you saw it on Deer Talk, you can get an extra 10% off today. But basically everything you could possibly want to know about turkey hunting, turkey calling, tactics, how to work certain situations on different birds. I know, Brian, you have columns in there called Bad Birds that basically gives you a scenario of, and I find it very interesting because I can go back and look at those and say, that's exactly what this turkey did to me yesterday. How can I hunt that turkey tomorrow?
Yeah, this is really an exciting product. I mean, because like you said, it encompasses everything we've kind of done online for the past few years. We have the decision time columns, we have advice on shooting and loads, we have just good old turkey hunting stories from our readers. One of the downloads is actually step-by-step calling instruction, mouth calls, friction calls, box calls. We troubleshoot tough turkeys. We talk about getting kids into turkey hunting. We interview other experts and get their take on various scenarios in turkey hunting. So, I mean, it really runs the entire turkey hunting gamut. And to have all these together as one package is amazing. Individually, many of these downloads would go for $10 on our store.
Right.
And now you can get them all in this
All
one great
package
package
for a
before
great
the
price.
season.
Check it out at shopdeerhunting.com today. Before we wrap up today, we want to check in with Alan Clements because Alan's got some exciting breaking news for us coming out of the Southeast. So we're going to get on the horn here with Alan and see what's going on down there.
Hello?
Alan.
Yes.
Alan Clements, Dan Schmidt, Brian Lovett. We're here at Deer Talk, and as always, with going last, you got the last about 8 minutes of the show.
All right.
How are you doing today?
I'm great. It's a nice day here in Alabama, and it's not icy and snowy, so that's a good day.
Yeah, you probably have a lot nicer. We have sheet ice on our parking lot today, so
It's on everything, actually. Yeah.
I'll pass on that.
Well, Alan, we've been talking about turkey hunting and coyote hunting and all sorts of stuff, kind of related to deer hunting because it's the off season. But I wanted to check in with you today because I know you had some interesting news coming out of Alabama, Florida, Louisiana. What's going down in the Southeast with some of the deer management issues?
Well, I think what's going on down here, we've got those 3 states, and I haven't seen any of the other proposals in the southeastern states yet. But the proposals from the conservation departments in Florida, Alabama, and Louisiana are all seeming to be geared toward a little bit more of a micromanagement style for deer. Louisiana, due to hurricanes, droughts, changing deer populations, has proposed to go back to some smaller units for doe management. They're proposing to add some doe days. Alabama has proposed to add a zone in the southwest corner of the state for the first time the first time that I can remember. I'm 47 years old. I don't ever remember a zone with February hunting season dates ever. This is a major deal in Alabama. We've always had a one season, one statewide, kind of a one thing fits all template. So this is a big deal. Plus, in Alabama and North Alabama, we've had a proposed doe reduction harvest zone. Right now, for years, we've been able to kill up to 2 does a day for the entire season, counting bow season, roughly 110 days. This would reduce in about 10 to 12 counties the doe harvest. And then in Florida, which has currently 4 zones, in those zones, they are proposing to create management units, break them down into smaller areas. So I think what we're seeing is some changing dynamics with populations, some changing attitudes and strategies with the state wildlife deer biologists, and it's an interesting trend. They're doing a little more, I think, proposing a little more micromanagement for smaller areas, and it'll be interesting to see how that turns out.
That really is because as we were talking off the phone just before, it seems, what song is it? They say the north goes south, the south goes north, and that seems to be happening here because up here specifically, in most of the upper Midwest states, we've had that micromanaging type effect. for over half a century. And the fact that, here in the state that we live in, we had over 80 deer management units up until just recently. And it just seems that perception among hunters becomes dissatisfied with something, so whatever you don't have, it must be better somewhere else. And I find it interesting that Florida is actually dicing up their units. I think personally it's a good idea for them, because to have 4 broad management units, it's very hard to manage that way. It's much easier now, and what we've found through research is that the smaller you get is even more difficult, because you just simply don't have the manpower or the state budget to do that. But on more localized levels, it makes a lot of sense. I think that they will find some success with that approach in some of those areas. As far as Alabama in February, I found that just fascinating. Not only from it's an extra hunting opportunity. That's pretty cool. That you can go somewhere and hunt whitetails in February. But I think from the state's perspective of management, I think it's really going to help them out a lot.
Well, one thing about the February season is and again, we're bucking a long tradition of deer season in Alabama ending January 31st, and I'm talking 40 years or more, probably more. So this is really setting some folks off. It also has a lot of guys very happy, because in that south portion of the state, and by South Alabama, I'm talking about maybe from Montgomery, you could draw a line from roughly Montgomery south and find peak rutting activity either mid-January through probably mid-February, somewhere in a 3 to 4 week range. There are guys down in extreme South Alabama right now who are still seeing bucks chasing. Their season's over. If this proposal goes through, they'll still be hunting right now, just like they are in the Panhandle of Florida, southeast Mississippi. There's a small portion there, and then also Arkansas is still in season right now, bow season through the end of February. So the February season is not a brand new concept or February dates in the southeast. It just is for Alabama. It's going to be a radical sea change. One of the biggest things that I'm watching is the southeast portion of South Alabama. Those guys are saying, now wait a minute, our deer do basically the same thing that these deer in southwest Alabama do. Why are we not included in this February deal? And that's kind of the big hubbub right now. So the other thing, they didn't add 10 extra days with this proposal. They proposed to close the season in this new zone in December for 10 days. And then they're going to add those on the back end into February for the gun hunters. So there's a lot of things going on, a lot of changes. Mississippi typically has several bills show up in their legislature. I'm kind of watching that to see what happens there. And I haven't seen anything on Arkansas, Kentucky, Carolinas yet. Georgia usually has a few things show up in their legislature also. So a lot of stuff happening. We've got a baiting bill in the legislature in Alabama. We have another bill that would extend hunting season through mid-February for the entire state in the legislature. And those two things are separate in Alabama. The Conservation Department proposes season dates, regulations, etc. In some states like Mississippi, the legislature does that completely with the input from the Conservation Department. In Alabama, if the legislature does a bill that might be in conflict with the Conservation Department, they kind of have to hammer it out and say, hey, this is good, this is bad, we don't want that, we don't really care, we keep hearing from our constituents, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of dynamics going on right now down here, and it's crazy season. Deer season's over, and now crazy season is here.
Crazy season begins. Well, if everybody wants to follow it, Alan has been covering it like a blanket, deerhunting.com. Just check out the features side of the website on the left there. We have daily updates from every state and anything deer hunting related. So check it out there. The other thing I want to mention to everybody before we go here today In addition to the Turkey Digital download, where we have a sale on the 2013, this year's whitetail rut calendars. Buy one, get one. It's only this week. We only have a few left. But buy one, get one. Get one for yourself. Get one for your buddy. Get one for your deer camp. The Charlie Alzheimer's rut predictions are in there at shopdeerhunting.com. Alan, thanks for joining us today. We'll talk to you again soon. For Brian Lovett, I'm Dan Schmidt. Thanks for joining us for Deer Talk Now. And be sure to watch the Deer Talk Now replays, which are on the website. If you've missed an episode, you can watch them there. We'll see you next week, and thanks for joining us.